Today's video does contain sensitive subject matter, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you'd like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. This true scary workplace story occurred in the autumn of 2012 in Glasgow, Scotland. The light was fading as it was the evening, and Glasgow gets very cold this time of year, so there was a bitter chill in the air. At around 6 p.m., my two friends, Neelam and Ayesha, who were both in their early 20s at the time, worked as beauticians in a beauty salon in the West End area of the city, and they were just closing up for the evening when a group of three fairly large men wearing ski masks aggressively pushed the door open and barged into the salon front. They were carrying blue plastic shopping bags that were bulging. The men then also closed the large front shutters down and had Neelam and Ayesha trapped in the store. Both of my friends were a bit stunned, and they didn't know what to say or do. The men began screaming and asking where the female owner of the salon was, to which they both shakily replied that they didn't know, which was true as the owner was hardly ever there in person. The men had very thick Glaswegian accents, and it seemed as though they were white. However, the girls were not certain about this. Although both of the girls were scared, they thought the men seemed fairly amateurish and thought that they would just leave after realizing the owner was not there. Things took a much more sinister turn, however, when suddenly the three men pulled out hammers and silver duct tape. The men then marched Neelam and Ayesha to the back area of the salon, where they bound their hands and feet and wrapped their mouths up with the duct tape. They were then forced to sit down in chairs with wheels on them. The thugs then debated what to do next. Wait on the off chance the owner would come in, or leave. The girls were obviously petrified at this point, and were hoping that they would just leave. Neelam was especially scared as she actually had a cold at the time, and was struggling with the tape that was now sealing her mouth. Her glasses also slid off of her face as she was struggling, so she was now struggling to see. She tried to ask the men if they could take the tape off of her mouth because of her cold, but she was only able to mumble as her mouth was taped very tightly. One of the men yelled at her to shut up. She tried her best not to cry, as that would have made things even worse. Ayesha was still very shocked by everything, but was mainly concerned for Neelam, who was just praying the thugs would go away. She also tried to speak, but to no avail. Thankfully, after a few minutes of looking at the girls and around the salon, they decided to just exit the salon's front door, but not before smashing the cash register and some mirrors with their hammers. They also threw some of the salon's equipment across the store. Surprisingly, the men didn't actually steal anything from the store. They then left the salon and left Neelam and Ayesha taped up and gagged out back. The girls struggled for quite a while to free themselves from the tape, but Ayesha moved her chair towards some hairdressing equipment and eventually managed to use a pair of scissors to free her hands and feet, and then remove the duct tape from her and Neelam's mouths. As soon as Neelam was freed, they called the police. The police finally arrived and gave the girls some blankets and took them in to ask questions. The whole incident only realistically lasted for about 20 minutes, although it felt much longer. Thankfully, the girls were not hurt, however, they were both very shaken up for a long time after this, and the men were never caught as far as they are aware. Both Neelam and Ayesha attended identify lineups, however, they could never say if any of the men they saw were any of the thugs, because the trio had ski masks on. Both Neelam and Ayesha are of South Asian Pakistani ancestry, and Ayesha did think one of the men did say something in Urdu at one point, but was not 100% sure. Both of my friends quit the salon immediately following this and got jobs elsewhere, and both are doing extremely well now, and they've put this awful incident behind them. They never did find out what those men wanted with the owner, and they are grateful that she wasn't there, as things could have been much worse. They, of course, had their suspicions about the owner after this horrible incident, but they were both just thankful to be okay and away from that salon forever. When I was a kid, I took a sports class every Saturday in the morning for about an hour, around 20 minutes from where I lived. One Friday after school, Mom takes me to do some grocery shopping, and we stop for coffee in a big chain place with a lengthy line. While waiting, Mom gets to talking with the man in front of us. He's probably mid-40s, grayish hair, seemingly friendly enough. Mom tells him the things moms do when they're talking about their kids, my name, what year I was in school, and stuff like that. We get our coffee, part ways, and think nothing of it. People have mundane conversations about their kids all the time. It's a universal experience. That was until the next day. We get to the neighborhood my class is in kind of early, so we stop at this local artisan place. The sort of place with clocks on the wall with international time zones of major cities and overpriced avocado on toast that you'll never get. We sat in because the rest of the stuff was cheap. It wasn't the best area. I suppose that someone was trying to gentrify the place. We're sitting, eating our breakfast, when Mom's eyes catch the man from yesterday. He's buying a coffee, small world, and all that. She tries to awkwardly get his attention so everyone can uncomfortably laugh at the circumstances. It's not that strange where I come from to do this. You're not expected to have a full-on conversation, but there's usually recognition in their eyes, or at least a strained smile. A sort of, funny, isn't it? Gesture of acknowledgement. The dude makes direct eye contact with Mom, stares coldly, unblinking for a few seconds, and then blanks us completely. It sets Mom on edge. That was strange. She tells me to finish my breakfast faster and we need to go. We get out on the street and decide, just in case, to take another route to my class that day. We take some obscure turns, the feeling of being watched itching at the back of our necks. When we look back after a while, there he is, staring again from across the street. That's what finally convinced me that Mom wasn't just being paranoid, nor overprotective. This was starting to get freaky for both of us. We reach my class unscathed, but my mom tells me she's going into another cafe across from the youth center to see if the guy turned up again, and seemed to be casing me. He walks past 15 minutes later, just about the amount of time a parent might stop watching and head home. What's the saying? Once is an event, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times is a pattern. Mom picks me up, she grabs my hand. I was a little too old for that. And we start trying to casually hightail it to our car. The neon signs in our head were flashing that something was off. If we were being followed, why? Did the man want me? My mom? Both of us? Did he know our license plate? Did he know where we lived? Was there more of him? 1,000 questions rattled through my brain as we walked like the drug users around the area. Heads down, hands fidgety, eyes blown, darting everywhere. In the end, we didn't think that we could trust that we weren't being tracked somehow. So we called my dad to trail us back home. We never saw the guy again. There wasn't any suspicious cars behind us. He didn't turn up at our house. But the whole experience was incredibly unsettling. Like we were being hunted somehow. That night, I had my first nightmare in years. A man had jumped me at my house. He had a knife to my neck. his fist pressing down on my clavicle. When I woke up, there was a dull pain where his hand had been. There wasn't anything behind his eyes. No madness or anger or fear. It was just the blank stare from that afternoon. I don't get nightmares. I never have. I don't scare easily, but that dream rattled me. I'm aware it was probably a stress nightmare caused by my brain trying to process that day. Sometimes I wonder if it was an omen of how things could have gone. We were fine. He didn't even get within 10 feet of us, but I don't think that feeling of being seen as prey, like we were about to be the victims of one of those disturbing documentaries you see on the crime drama channels, people there one minute, gone the next, will ever sit quite right with me. A while back, I moved into a new apartment about 20 miles from my previous home, because the company I was renting through was starting to hit a point where I couldn't work with them. I would mention something that needed to be fixed, they would ignore me, and then they would try to send the maintenance guy on days where I worked without notice, and it was just a huge mess. It ended with me saying screw it, finding a much smaller apartment, and breaking my lease just to get away from their BS. Yes, I know this isn't the best way to do things, but I was fed up after living there for 4 years, and it wasn't showing any signs of getting better, so I was done. Moving into my new apartment was pretty simple. The complex staff seemed nice enough. I got into an apartment on the mid-level, and my boyfriend was able to help me move most of the heavy stuff. Once we got all the boxes into the apartment, and got the furniture set up like it should be, I was pretty happy with how it all turned out. It was quite a bit smaller than my previous place, but it was also cheaper, and sometimes downsizing is necessary. I decided that I could spend a few years here, and if I didn't like it after that, I could go ahead and just find another place. Plus, by then, if my boyfriend and I were still together, I was kind of assuming we would be looking into our own place at that point. The first few days at my new apartment were great. I was enjoying setting everything up, I was enjoying the new location, and even though I hadn't gotten the internet set up yet, I was spending my evenings replaying all my old games on my PS4 that I had forgotten about. One game in particular had been holding on to my attention for several nights, and that was Bloodborne. I've never really been into the Souls games, but I love the atmosphere in Bloodborne, and it was one of 4 games that I had on disc, so it was the obvious choice. This may not sound important, but it actually is, because I had the disc in the console while I was playing it, as is necessary. The reason that's important is because one night when I got home from work, I sat on my couch and went to play it. But when I turned on my console, the first game on the list was The Last of Us. Now, I like The Last of Us, but I haven't played it for a long time, so I was a bit confused. I wasn't really sure what to make of it, to be honest, so I just switched out the disc and went on with my night. I mentioned it to my boyfriend the next morning when we were on the phone, and he made a joke about how I was probably going to play it at some point, and put the disc in and just forgot. That, or maybe I was sleepwalking playing the PlayStation or something. I laughed and said that it had to be one of those because how else could it have happened? Again, it was weird, but I just moved on and accepted that I put the disc in and forgot. That same night, when I got home from work, I noticed that my front door was slightly open. The doors to these apartments don't fully shut if you let them go, but it will shut most of the way. But the latch won't catch. It's a weird design on the door, but I think they were made this way on purpose to stop people's doors from accidentally slamming. I went to open it, but I kind of freaked out at the possibility of someone having broken into my apartment. So, I panicked and called my boyfriend asking if he could come over. I told him that my door was open and that I thought someone may be in the apartment, and said that I didn't want to go in alone. He agreed, left work early, and came over. He opened the door and we both slowly walked through the apartment, just cautiously checking each room. Nothing seemed to really be out of place. Nothing was missing, and all the lights were off like I would have left them. After spending most of an hour checking things and being comforted by my boyfriend, I apologized for having him leave work early. He told me that it wasn't a big deal, that he explained what happened to his manager, and that they wanted to be sure I was safe more than anything. After he left, I honestly spent most of that night crying and thinking I was going crazy. It was only the 2 events, but something just seemed off. I wasn't the type to do things and forget them. I wasn't the type to not lock my door, and I wasn't the type to be all panicky like this. I had no idea why I was freaking out so bad, and I think that was the worst part of all of it. The next couple of days, I made notes of everything I did. I would text myself when I played a game on my console to make sure it didn't change. I would take a short video of myself locking the front door when I left for work. I would document if I moved something to a new place. I was feeling a bit crazy with how obsessive I was over all this, but I was doing this for peace of mind. Then, everything finally came to light on what was going on. I had had a day at work where I was told to go home early because we'd had a number of clients cancel on us, and I wasn't needed. It wasn't something that happened a lot, but it did sometimes happen. No clients meant no work, and no money coming in. So it was just easier for them to give us half the day off than pay us for sitting around doing nothing for, 5 hours. So I headed home, and when I got to my door, I noticed that it was cracked open again. As soon as I saw it, I stopped. I stepped off to the side, pulled out my phone, and checked. Sure enough, there was a video in my camera roll that I had taken that morning, no more than 4 hours prior to that moment, of me locking the door and making sure that it was locked. This time, I decided that I was going to call the office of the apartment and have them send one of their maintenance workers down. At first, they were a bit hesitant, but I asked them to just please send one of the maintenance staff over to check the locks, because I was concerned for my safety. This seemed to work, and within a few minutes, one of the guys came down to my building. I met him at the front door and told him that I was a bit worried because this was the second time this had happened. I told him that I'd had a situation a few days prior where my disc had changed in my PlayStation. I told him about the door being open, and I showed him that I was taking a video every single morning of me locking the door when I left. He looked at me like I was a bit crazy, but after explaining things a bit more, he just kind of went with what I was saying. We went back to my door and we both slowly entered, and at that point, my worst fears were actually confirmed. Right there, sitting on my couch, playing The Last of Us, was some random naked guy that I had never met. Obviously, there was a bit of a mutual freakout in this situation where I screamed, he screamed, and I pulled the door shut, telling the maintenance guy that I had no idea who he was. He laughed a bit, but then it kind of clicked that I was serious, that this guy had broken into my apartment and was sitting naked on my couch. He told me to go outside and call the police right away, and that he would hold the door shut to make sure this guy didn't go anywhere. I did what he said, and while I was telling the cops where I was, I could hear this guy banging and screaming on the door, yelling about letting him out. Thankfully, the maintenance guy was a big dude, and the person in my apartment wasn't going anywhere. The cops showed up and obviously arrested this man. Thankfully, he was clothed by this point. As they pulled him out, I confirmed with them that I had no idea who he was. But it was at this point that the maintenance person said he knew. He took me down to the office where we had a chat with the property management, which was all part of the police report in the end. To wrap this up and explain what the hell actually happened, this guy was a former tenant. In fact, he was the tenant that lived in my apartment before I moved in. When they had vacated, the apartment was empty for about 2 months before I moved in, and all the repairs and such were done in that time frame. There was, however, one small item that somehow slipped through the cracks, and that was replacing the door locks. And this was something that they intended to do and were supposed to do, but never got around to. So, when I moved in, the lock was the same as when he lived there, which was pretty much just inviting him to come back and break in. Apparently, he hadn't actually wanted to leave. He and his girlfriend lived there and they broke up, so when he left, he had nowhere to go. He decided to come and check out his old place because, of course, he still had a key. And wouldn't you know it, it all worked out. I was at work during the day, so he had a place he could take a nap at, play games, be comfortable in, and as long as he left before a certain time and made the place look the same as when he got there wouldn't be any issues. He had slipped up a few times, which I had noticed, and I caught him off guard when I came home early. As to why he was naked, I have no idea. I guess he just really wanted to be comfortable. Obviously, I worked out something with the property, as this was a huge deal and a major violation of my safety. We changed the locks that day, and they verified that the only people that had the keys were myself and maintenance. They were also very apologetic about the whole thing, and I think I was pretty forgiving, considering this mistake could have had an incredibly disgusting outcome if he had been more malicious. This was less than a year ago at this point, and my lease came up for renewal, and I think to their surprise, I did re-sign it. Changing the locks out was enough to guarantee that this guy couldn't come back. Well, that and the charges that he caught. Thankfully, I haven't had a problem since this whole event, though I am a lot more paranoid about locking my doors now. This happened years ago in the 80s, back when I was 19. I live in a small town in the south, and it was common to have bonfires in the woods on the weekends in the fall. And my friend and I, both female, went to a spot where a few others were hanging out in an open area in the woods. There was a fire, and we were all standing around, drinking wine coolers and beer, just talking and hanging out. The main subject being a friend of ours who went missing a few days earlier. He was the kind of guy that everyone knew, but I wasn't close friends with him. My friend is talking to someone and a guy comes over to me and starts making small talk. He seemed a little weird, and I only knew him as the guy who dated a girl that I went to grade school with. I couldn't quite understand why, but I felt a chill and an eerie feeling while he was talking. So much so that I walked away in the middle of his conversation, and I grabbed my friend and told her that we needed to leave now. She seemed a bit confused, but could tell by my tone that something was wrong. When we got to the car, I told her that I couldn't explain it, but I just felt really uneasy. So, we left, and didn't think much else about it. A couple of days later, the guy's body was found in a shallow grave in the woods, and it was soon discovered that he was murdered over a dispute about a girl by none other than the weird guy making small talk with me at the fire. I still get creeped out thinking about how casually he was just out in the woods, hanging out, knowing that he had murdered a guy, and that everyone was discussing the missing friend in front of him. A twist of the story was that a few years later, he actually escaped prison and was on the run for about a week. I worked at a movie store at the time, and one day a woman came in to rent a VCR and movies. She was on some kind of drugs and very obviously high. She was all over the place, and her eyes were wide and she was talking non-stop. She proceeded to tell me that she was staying at a cabin at the lake with B, the escaped murderer. I acted normal and began filling out the info for her to rent the things, and I told her I had to get something from the back. I actually called the law, and I told them what she said. They ended up following her and catching the guy again. Lots of creepy encounters growing up in the 80s. I loved growing up then, but definitely had a lot of close calls and weird encounters when I was younger. This happened about 12 years ago, but I remember it vividly. I was waiting at the Orlando airport for my mom to fly in for vacation to see me, my daughter, she was a year at the time, and my then fiancé. Her plane had been delayed due to weather, and it was getting later and later. Finally, the airport was almost empty and it was almost midnight. I needed to use the restroom and told my fiancé to hang on to my daughter's stroller as he was falling asleep. I wasn't tired. I was excited to see my mom and I had drank a few coffees. So I went into the women's room and every stall door was open. I chose a random one and used it. All the while, it was completely silent in there. I left the stall and was washing my hands. The bathroom had that mirror that went all the way across the wall, and I saw nothing. While washing my hands, I got a really weird feeling. I'd been looking down at my hands the whole time, and when I looked up, there was a scary-looking woman standing right behind me, almost touching me, leaning towards me. We made eye contact in the mirror, and she said, "Jesus loves you. Do you know that?" In an extremely freaky way. I was freaked out and just nodded while still staring at her in the mirror. She then walked away, and I couldn't see if she left the bathroom or not due to the design of the exit. I was shaking over the exchange because of the tone that she used. It was almost like saying Jesus saved me from her doing something awful to me. I never heard her come in, and I'm a pretty paranoid person, so I pay attention to listening for people and things. Plus, those bathrooms echo so much, I should have heard the footsteps. I also never saw her hands, so I don't know if she had a weapon. I timidly left the bathroom and my fiancé was standing near the bathroom door holding my daughter. I asked him if he saw that lady and he had no idea what I was talking about. I looked around the area and it was empty. Just us there. So, lady with the crazy dark gray hair that was wild around your face, dark eyes, and oversized sweater, your face haunts me. If you were just trying to screw with me, well, it worked. I'm still creeped out to this day. So, this just happened this past weekend. I'm the corporate administrator and had gone to an all-day business meeting with some coworkers on Friday. I wasn't expecting it to be all day. It was supposed to wrap up at 1, but, as you know, people have to continually ask questions and chit-chat, so it lasted until 4:30. So, after the hour-long drive back to work, we carpooled, I was beat, and I went home. I decided I would come in on Saturday to catch up on some stuff. I'm salary, so it wouldn't really matter about overtime. I work on the top and second floor of a 3-floor building. We have offices, conference rooms, a fitness center, and a training room, so we occupy the majority of the building. The first floor doesn't have much but one business. In order to access the building, you have to have a key card that is programmed to the building, and then our interior suites are programmed separately to our key cards. So, Saturday, I went in around 9 a.m. and was working for a bit. I decided to start working on a project I was due to start the following week, as I had the time and no distractions. But at this time, it was around noon. I had skipped breakfast, so I thought I would go grab lunch, bring it back to my office, and eat as I worked. I usually take the stairs to just get a little more exercise, rather than the elevator, and as I entered the stairwell, a weird feeling came over me. Kind of like apprehension. I was suddenly spooked being in the building alone, even though you can't access it from the outside unless you have the correct permissions on your keycard for weekend access. I control the system, so I know the keycard's out there with that access. I decided I was just being silly and walked down the stairs, and upon exiting, I rounded the corner to see a strange man just sitting on the floor. I literally jumped while in mid-stride. I then blurted out, "Oh, you scared me." He sat there expressionless and said, "I'm sorry, sweetie." And I asked if he was with the cleaning crew after seeing a mop bucket. He nodded, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And my heart felt like it was going about 150 miles per hour. I then had to continue on my way and nearly had to step over him. His expression, though, was what made this the creepiest. He was void of all emotions and had dead eyes. He was with the cleaning crew, but I think he was just there with them. I never saw him do anything, and I checked on them viewing some of the cameras. He just seemed to follow them around. I kind of think that he was on something, but I can't be sure. I, male, 39, matched with Priya, female, 38, on Bumble some months ago. We got along very well, went on drives, boutiques, coffee outlets like Third Wave, got a lot of patronage from us as well. Usual late 30s couple, no kids, and significant disposable income thanks to tech jobs in Bengaluru. We both lived relatively far away from each other. We would stay at each other's places whenever we could. I was married before, and I am a cat parent. This stray adopted me and my ex-wife some years ago, and since my ex moved to Europe after the divorce, I've been taking care of it since 2 years. Apu, the cat, is a sweet, cuddly, brown bundle. In 2019, just before the pandemic, my ex and I had been to the US to visit her younger sister, a seller on Etsy, and they had listed cat collars for sale, which came with a bell. We'd bought a dozen or so of those collars and brought it back with us. The cat collar with the tinkling bells on Apu was hilarious. He hated it for a bit, but then he got used to it. Over the past 2 months, the bell on the cat collar started disappearing. I didn't think much of it. Those collars were bought in 2019. I thought they were wearing off sooner, and since I had about a dozen of them, I would always change the collar on Apu. Soon enough, the bell would go missing. Last month, I decided to stay over at Priya's place in Whitefield. She lives by herself in one of those gated villas. I don't worry much about Apu. He does his business in the litter box and knows how to work the cat food dispenser. One thing about Priya, she cannot stand smoking. And I had started for reasons of my own, but I hadn't disclosed that I do smoke sometimes. So, yeah, I was staying at her villa, and it starts raining heavily every day. We don't have much to do, so stuck indoors, we finish a bottle of Amrut single malt whiskey. The neighboring villas are all flooded, they're pumping water out, and we realize it's only a matter of time before Priya's villa too will be flooded. We wanted to secure the doors as much as we could to stop water from entering. I asked Priya if she has any old clothes or blankets that we can use to barricade. A futile attempt, but we're drunk and we want to do something. She hands me an old, hideous green blanket, along with some old beige curtains and t-shirts. We plug the doors the best that we can. We're tipsy and tired. We collapse on the couch. I vaguely remember saying something half funny about the hideous green blanket. That was my mother's favorite blanket. After she passed, I would always have it with me whenever I went to sleep. But then I remember having it on me when I had a miscarriage. I felt my mother's presence. She said, and you know what? She hated cats. So my date doesn't have her mother, who hated cats when alive. She believes in the afterlife and she's had a miscarriage. Yet she's held on to that hideous green blanket for God knows how long. The things I realized one rainy, drunken night that I had never known for months. Perils of modern-day dating. I get this sudden urge to smoke. I excuse myself, lock myself in the bathroom, and open the windows. Once finished, I throw the cigarette butt into the toilet and flush, and that's when I hear oddly familiar sounds. I lift the lid off of the flush tank, and 4 of Apu's cat collar trinkets are sitting there. I quietly walk out of the back door. The streets are flooded, no cabs. I book a hotel room on the Agoda app and stay for the night. I then blocked Priya's number. I've deleted Bumble, and Apu's cozied up next to me, purring away with no care in the world as I type this. And it's raining again. My family owns a boutique in a very big city here in the south. Our boutique is located in a very wealthy neighborhood, but that doesn't say much. If you go not even a mile north, south, west, or east, you'll enter the rough areas of the city. With that being said, we have a lot of homeless, drug addicts, and sketchy people in general come into our store. When these people come in, we are also nice, respectful, and treat them just like we would our normal customers. We try not to judge by their appearance. However, we do not tolerate the begging, stealing, or soliciting. So, we've all had our share of weird encounters at our store. However, I think my most recent encounter was the creepiest. Last week, getting ready to close, I was tidying up the store when a woman came in. I greeted her as normal, and everything seemed like it was smooth sailing. She was looking around and engaging in conversation about some of our pieces, and when all of a sudden things changed quickly. The vibe and feeling of the room just felt eerie. So I moved behind the counter to just create a barrier. She began by grabbing one of our candles that has the saying, "I love you to the moon and back" across the front. I think this is what originally triggered her. She began talking about her family, and how she would read the book "I Love You to the Moon and Back" to her triplets that she didn't even know that she had. She then started telling me about her life being married to Ryan Gosling, and how she recently killed him because he kept poisoning her and hiding her 3 sets of triplets and daughter from her. At this point, I was just listening. I didn't want to upset her any more than she already was. When she finished, she began walking the store again, telling me how she just got out of jail for stabbing someone. And at this point, she gets about 4 feet from my counter and tilts her head, looks me in the eyes, and says, "I really feel like chopping you up right now." We were the only 2 in the store at the time, and I was in shock. I had no idea what was about to happen. Up until then, she was just rambling, and this was the first instance of her showing aggression. Luckily, seconds after that statement, another customer, one of our regulars, came in, and the woman who had just told me she wanted to chop me up grabbed her stuff and walked out the door. My regular could feel the tension as I rushed behind her and locked us in the store. So, lady who wants to chop me up, let's not meet ever again. So that was day 5 of our Halloween Extravaganza 2022 Supreme. That's right, we've added sour cream and tomatoes! I was stretching, sorry. Patience is now laughing at me. This was day 5, and this was Stalker and Stranger Stories. Definitely always terrifying stories to have on the channel. Really creepy stuff. Really, really creepy stuff. And as I've always said, these stories are meant to be, I suppose, edutainment. They're informational, they're educational, and they are entertaining, of course, but the real purpose of these is to have people listen to them and think, hey, that person went through this. I should prevent a situation, if possible, where I could go through that same thing. Locking doors, being aware of the surroundings, etc., etc. Always critical steps to take to protect yourself. I don't know if any of that made sense, but it did to me, so enjoy. Anyways, friends, if you did like the video, please consider hitting that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing. You can also hit the thanks button or go to Patreon or channel memberships where you get early access to content like this. And the last thing you could do is leave me a comment. What are your thoughts on, I don't know, things, I guess? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the fact that we're on day 5 of our Halloween Extravaganza 2022 Supreme? I think we're doing pretty good. My throat kind of does hurt, but I think that's because I didn't take any sinus medication today, and I haven't drank enough water. That's on me, so doing what we can. Anyways, friends, I hope you're looking forward to the rest of these Extravaganza videos. If not, well, I'm sorry, because they're coming regardless. And I hope I do see you on the next video. But until then, my friends, is what I was trying to say. Please, sleep well.